American citizens in Kenya say key domestic and foreign policy issues matter most in how they plan to vote in this year's U.S. presidential elections. And Africa loses nearly $90 billion annually to financial crimes linked to corruption, tax evasion, and environmental crime. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. There are just 8 days to go until Election Day in the U.S., and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump headlined a campaign rally at New York City's Madison Square Garden on Sunday. Trump, a New York-born businessman and celebrity, hoped to use the event at the iconic venue to deliver his closing argument against his Democratic opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris.
I'm here today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote in this election, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country, and I will bring back the American dream. We need the American dream to come back home.
Some of the former president's introductory speakers used racist and misogynistic language in warming up the capacity crowd, including a comedian who described the Caribbean U.S. territory of Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Earlier Sunday, Harris spoke at a black church in Philadelphia in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
Here in Pennsylvania right now, each of us has an opportunity to make a difference. Because in this moment, we do face a real question. What kind of country do we want to live in? That's before us right now. What kind of country do we want for our children and our grandchildren? A country of chaos, fear, and hate, or a country of freedom, justice, and compassion?
Harris also visited a Puerto Rican restaurant in Philadelphia and a youth basketball facility before delivering remarks at a rally. Polls show Trump and Harris are neck and neck in the battleground states that will decide the next president, with just over a week until Election Day. More than 38 million votes have already been cast in early and mail-in voting. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, who is running for re-election, is being called a fascist and described as unfit to serve by several of his former top aides. But Trump vice presidential pick J.D. Vance is rejecting the accusations. Meanwhile, the Democratic presidential campaign is running ads on the controversy in battleground states. Viewers Veronica Balderas Iglesias has the details.
John Kelly served as White House Chief of Staff for former President Donald Trump from 2017 to 2019. In a recent interview with the New York Times, the retired four-star Marine general was asked if Trump was a fascist and replied, quoting here, "He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure." Trump reacted to the accusations on his Truth social media platform, writing, among other things, "John Kelly is a lowlife and a bad general whose advice in the White House I no longer sought, and told him to move on." On Sunday, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance commented on remarks by Kelly and former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, that Trump is a fascist.
People who worked most closely with him, most of them are supporting this ticket. Mark Milley and John Kelly are both disgruntled former employees.
13 former Trump aides, however, released an open letter on Friday backing John Kelly's remarks and warning the Republican presidential nominee is, quote, unfit to serve. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham strongly disagrees.
I was around him. I don't think he's a fascist. I thought he was a very strong president at a time we needed a strong president. I think he will be a strong president to get this country back on track.
Targeting battleground voters, the Democratic presidential campaign of Vice President Kamala Harris has been running an ad with audio of John Kelly's remarks. Harris herself hasn't shied away from voicing similar concerns.
Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there. to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who supports Harris's bid for the White House, was asked Sunday on NBC's Meet the Press whether he believes Trump is a fascist.
I don't like using those words, but clearly he has a strong tendency to authoritarianism and to undermining American democracy.
The controversy comes as both presidential nominees prepare to wrap up their campaigns. Trump campaigns in battleground states later in the week after a Sunday rally at New York's Madison Square Garden. Harris is also scheduled to visit all swing states in the coming days. She will deliver a, quote, closing argument to voters near the Washington National Mall on Tuesday. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News.
Early voting here in Washington, D.C. begins today and runs through November 3rd. Residents of the District of Columbia, the U.S. Capitol, can vote in person before Election Day or choose to vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Washington, D.C. is home to nearly 700,000 people, and the stakes could not be higher. And D.C. could play a significant role in deciding who becomes the next president of the United States. Joining us live from here in Washington is VOA's Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul. What's the significance of early voting in the nation's capital?
Thanks, Esther. It's significant indeed. Voting started today and it will go on through November 3rd. And probably most people here are voting. I ran into some enthusiastic supporters of both Trump and former Vice President Kamala Harris, who are all excited to cast their votes. But there are some key things that most of these people are talking about, especially we conducted a mini poll exit here, and most people are talking about the issues, specifically immigration, the inflation, but perhaps more importantly, they are talking about abortion rights. Most of the people that I talk to here think this is one of the reasons why they should come and vote strongly.
Paul, I recall in 2022, Washington, D.C. restored voting rights for its residents, allowing even non-citizens to vote in local elections. Does this also apply to the federal elections?
Absolutely not. You are correct by saying that the D.C. allowed non-citizens to vote, but it's just in local elections, not in the federal elections. So to qualify that, you want to say, for example, there are 500 registered non-U.S. citizens who are going to be voting in this election, but mainly in the local elections and not the federal elections. Federal elections, I mean the presidential elections, but they can vote for council members, council for anything else except in the federal election.
And I think we've heard about legal challenges here, Paul, raised by Republican lawmakers, specifically regarding the voting rights of non-citizens in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. What kind of reactions are you hearing from there?
Mixed reactions. Obviously, when you talk to a lot of Democrats, this is one thing they've been fighting for, especially in places like Washington, D.C. It's a district without representation, meaning that they don't have a vote, but they are taxed. So when you talk to people who are close to that issue, they say they should allow non-citizens to vote. But when you talk to Republicans, this is something they're not going to tolerate. In fact, they have challenged this through the court system. The Senate is yet to even to pass this bill into law. So there is a lot of contention when it comes to non-citizens being allowed to vote, and I can see this even going further to the Supreme Court, especially here in the district.
Paul, I'm sure you're going to be meeting some of first-time voters. Tell us what they're saying they're excited about. Paul Ndiho, thank you very much for your reporting live from downtown Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
for some Americans living in Kenya, key domestic and foreign policy issues matter in how they plan to vote in this year's U.S. presidential election. Zainab Said spoke to two expatriates and a report from Nairobi.
Brendan Seppers is an educator who has called Nairobi home for over 15 years. He is one of approximately 36,000 Americans residing in Kenya, according to a 2021 State Department report. Seppers says that foreign policy matters are just as important to him as domestic issues.
Given what one candidate has done in the past against, a woman's right to choose, for instance, what she does with her body, that's something that's very important to me. LGBTQ rights is also something that's very important to me. And, I think it's an interesting election because, the candidate that I support, I don't 100% align on with every issue. Like, for instance, our policy towards Israel and Palestine. I wish you were better.
Seppers says although the American community in Kenya has made progress in terms of awareness on how to vote from afar and ensuring that everyone is up to speed with the election process back home, the gap between U.S. state rules and individual efforts remain a challenge.
Unless you really know what the rules are for your state, it can be tricky to know, even to check if you're registered to vote, to check if you've requested an absentee ballot, because those are two separate processes.
David Aronson is another American expert living in Nairobi. He says although the two countries are miles apart, American experts in Kenya are excited to participate, and Kenyans are curious to learn about the democratic process of the United States.
U.S. activity can have a major, meaningful impact on countries like Kenya, and where who we elect matters a lot, even to the people of Kenya. In fact, sometimes I think the rest of the world should get a separate vote on who they want to be U.S. president, because it's so important to the whole world.
Seppers agrees, saying that the U.S. election has a global impact.
Policy in America impacts my life in Kenya because, the U.S. has so much influence over policy in other places that it would be silly of me to act like, I can just ignore the U.S. because I don't live there anymore.
Don't take anything for granted.
And the contrast, I think, was quite clear.
Both experts believe that this year's U.S. presidential elections play a significant role in shaping international relations. Zainab Said, VOA Africa, Nairobi, Kenya.
For analysis on the upcoming U.S. presidential election, I'm joined live from here in Washington by Bruce Fine, an American lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. Bruce, we're just 8 days away from Election Day on November 5th, and the race is extremely tight. What do you make of Trump's rally in New York on Sunday?
Well, Trump has been a broken record really since November of 2020. Everything is a conspiracy against him. He uses vulgarities to vilify anybody he thinks is not going to support him. He claims that he can make the waves go back without any facts. So what we saw at Madison Square Garden is nothing new. It's just the same old Trump. And I think it's really quite alarming. I think that it's important for your audience to recognize that Trump's own words condemn him as fit for office. I'm quoting exactly from Mr. Trump's proclamation on July 23rd, 2019. Quote, "Then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president." He later said that he could suspend or terminate the Constitution if he decided that there were electoral fraud, not based on any evidence, but just his statement. He has refused to say that he would accept the outcome of the balloting on November 5th, despite repeated requests, and even his running mate saying that it ought to be a peaceful transfer of presidential power. And when we look at the critics of Mr. Trump, it is not just Mr. Kelly or retired General Kelly or his vice president, Mike Pence, who knows Mr. Trump a lot better than J.D. Vance will ever know him, has said, I cannot vote for Mr. Trump.
Well,
he's
Bruce,
a clear and present danger.
Some may say that, it's the language of politics, especially during campaigns, and maybe it's not as harmful as other people think. But then let's move on to, on the other hand, where Kamala Harris has celebrities like Beyonce knows, Taylor Swift was in her campaign. What kind of influence do these celebrities bring into trying to woo and sway voters towards, her campaign?
I can't resist, because I believe this is too long. I've been in Washington in politics a lot longer probably than most viewers have in you. The language that Mr. Trump's used is unprecedented by leaps and bounds. Even Richard Nixon, at his worst Watergate moments, never suggested he had the right to do anything he wanted as president. So just to say, well, he uses these words, these are the words of a dictator, and he admires dictators, and he stated he does. Mr. Putin, Mr. Xi, Mr. Kim Jong-un of North Korea, these are not simply slips of the tongue. He even refers favorably to Adolf Hitler from time to time. These are not my words, these are communicated to his inner staff. And I apologize for pausing here, because this could be the end. He said, well, after you vote for me, you don't have to vote ever again. Yeah, because he said on day one, his words, I'll be a dictator. Now, what about the influencers? My view is that you're dramatically overstating, how they change votes. By and large, at this stage, the records and the choice between Harris and Trump have been so stark for so long, the influencers are not going to, in my judgment, change any votes. It's possible that they may bring out some voters who otherwise might not vote, but I don't think the American people really believe Taylor Swift has a clue about American politics, about to save this country from self-ruination, due process, illegal wars, whatever. So I think it will be very modest, and you probably have influencers on both sides cancel each other out.
Bruce, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you very much for your insight. Bruce Fine is an American lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, a new initiative trains journalists to follow the money and expose corruption. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, the United Nations says more than 600 million women and girls are now affected by war. That's a 50% increase from 10 years ago. The UN also says they fear the world has forgotten them amid an escalating backlash against women's rights and gender equality. A Ugandan court has sentenced former Lord's Resistance Army commander Thomas Kwoyelo to 40 years in prison. In August, the Ugandan International Crimes Division found Kwoyelo guilty on 44 charges, including murder, pillaging, inhumane acts, and gender-based violence such as rape. Lawyers for Kwoyelo, 50, say he is going to appeal the sentence. And hundreds of people marched in South Africa to mark 35 years of Pride Johannesburg, an annual event that has been critical in advocating equal rights for the LGBTQ+ community. The march on Saturday was an opportunity for the LGBTQ+ community to highlight critical issues such as the discrimination most members of the community still face. Africa loses nearly $90 billion annually to financial crimes linked to corruption, tax evasion and environmental crime. However, an initiative is training journalists to follow the money and expose how these crimes are connected to other illegal activities. Senanu Todd reports from Accra.
Reporter Jessie Olamorris prepares for her latest assignment, covering human rights for the media outlet Yen in Ghana. Her coverage on migration, street hawkers and homelessness helps expose gaps in social policies and inspires advocacy.
I've always wanted to be the voice of the voiceless, speak for people who cannot speak for themselves.
That drive expanded when Olamorris joined a training program that introduced her to how cartels, politicians, and businesses move money from illegal activities across borders.
Evading taxes, human trafficking, money laundering, and all of these were issues that were everyday issues. Sometimes you see them and then you just take them as normal things, but they were really things that were hurting the country.
The United Nations estimates Africa loses $88.6 billion a year, or 3.7% of Africa's combined GDP, to the cross-border movement of money linked to illegal activities. These illicit financial flows, or IFFs, come from a range of sources including illegal extraction of resources such as gold, cocoa, timber, and fisheries. IFF expert Bishop Akogo says cartels create ecosystems that fund terrorism, nature crimes, and human rights violations.
They largely would use intimidation, violence, and others to acquire the items. They use, for example, they would child labor to produce some of the items that they can then ship to other places. They also use bribery and corruption to corrupt the system.
To expose these illicit practices, the Media Foundation for West Africa and the Thomson Reuters Foundation created a training program for journalists. The assignment to follow the money. The program teaches investigative reporting, fact-checking, and how to analyze company records and statements.
The areas of covering illicit financial flows is an area where you are dealing with the wealthy and powerful. And therefore it is important that we will equip you with both the skills and the resilience to be able to cover that subject.
The project has trained over 40 investigative journalists over 2 years. In that time, they have made headlines by uncovering irregularities in government scholarship programs and tax waiver policies. Reporter Jessie Olamorris says with her training, she is investigating possible connections between human traffickers and unauthorized foreign currency traders bringing cash across the border.
Nobody checks the source of the money at the borders because they are unapproved routes. So if it's involving human trafficking or any of these illegal activities, nobody knows.
She hopes following the money will help bring criminals to justice. Senanu Todd for VOA News, Accra.
Many European Union countries are calling for the bloc to clamp down on migration amid a surge in support for right-wing political parties. But Spain is bucking the trend and insists Europe's aging population needs controlled migration to boost its economy. Henry Ridgewell explains.
42,000 irregular migrants have arrived in Spain so far this year, a two-thirds increase from 2023. Most arrive on Spain's Canary Islands, more than 100 kilometres from the African coastline. Last year alone, around 6,000 migrants died attempting the crossing, according to human rights groups. But for many, the dangers are outweighed by the dream of a new life in Europe.
If you make it here, the only thing you have to do is go to class, to keep learning, to talk to people. You have to be an open person, especially as an immigrant. You have to make a double effort, and that's what we're doing now.
For the migrants, there is hope of a better life. The Spanish government also sees economic potential. Like many Western countries, Spain's population is aging fast. It desperately needs young workers to build the economy and pay taxes. But the country's birth rate last year hit its lowest level ever recorded at under 1.2, among the lowest in Europe. Speaking at a European Union leaders' summit Thursday, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said immigration is vital.
Our present and future competitiveness, the economic growth of our country, the sustainability of our welfare model also depends on migration. We must manage migration flows from the perspective of a demographic challenge.
But amid a rise in support for far-right parties across Europe, many EU member states want tougher migration controls. Striking a balance won't be easy.
We are a country with strong values, and we want this balance between controlling migration and offering asylum seekers a legal way to enter and to respect their rights. We need that. Here in Spain, without migrants, we have no fruits on the supermarkets. Possibly the economy simply could not function properly. We need migrants.
As part of its new approach, Spain is drafting a strategy for Africa, focusing on what it describes as the economic and social transformation of the continent. While seeking to facilitate legal migration, Spain is trying to stop irregular migrants arriving on its shores. It wants the EU's border agency Frontex to seek permission to patrol African coastlines to intercept the migrant boats. Many migrants are traumatized by the journey.
I want to give some advice to my countrymen and my friends. Don't come in a small boat because they are very dangerous.
Spain wants a long-term solution to migration that works for Africa and for Europe. But the hope of a better life continues to draw tens of thousands of people across these dangerous seas. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.